Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Planning and Land Use Committee meeting for Monday, December 2nd, 2024. This evening, the committee is present with the exception of Kathleen Doney, who sends her regrets. First, we'd like to acknowledge with respect that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Kasepsum nations. We do have an option for public participation. Make that call if there's anyone interested at this point. I'm going to hazard a guess that that's a no, despite the huge crowd. So we will move to approval of the agenda. I'd look for a motion to approve the Planning and Land Use Committee meeting minutes from December 2nd, 2024 as amended. I have that motion here. Katrina. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Sorry, my mistake. That was the adoption of the minutes, actually. I've got to go back and approve the agenda for this evening, actually. So that was an incorrect date on that. So can I have a motion to approve the committee meeting agenda for this evening? Councillor Jansen, all those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, moving on. Under new business, we have item 5.1. Desiree Givens will speak to the Bylaw 1710 official community plan amendment, which regards environmental development permit areas, engagement update and response. So over to you, Desiree. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening, committee members. So this first item in your agenda is an update on the consultation process for Bylaw 1700-10, which is a bylaw that proposes amendments to the OCP to update the city's riparian area guidelines and environmental guidelines. You may recall that this item was first introduced in around this time last year, but just to give some background on the project, it started because staff noticed the city's environmental guidelines, particularly for riparian areas, needed to be updated to respond to provincial changes that were introduced in 2019, which was after the city had last updated its guidelines in 2018. To help with this, we hired a consultant, qualified environmental professional, or QEP for short, to review the current guidelines and suggest updates. The goal was to make sure that the city's guidelines were easier to understand, more consistent with other city policies, and most importantly, in line with the latest changes to the provincial legislation. After receiving the consultant's recommendations, we drafted a new bylaw to make those changes. This was presented to the Planning and Land Use Committee and Council last year, as well as a public hearing was held in late January. So during the public hearing, we received feedback from the development community and several QEPs and professionals about the amendments, which prompted us to hit pause and consult with a wider group of qualified professionals before moving forward. So the purpose of tonight's update is to provide a summary of what we've heard during this consultation process, explain how we've responded to that feedback, and request a committee recommendation with respect to next steps on this project. So the city's environment committee was provided the same update a couple of weeks ago on November 18th. They decided to recommend to council option number 1, and their feedback has resulted in a minor change to the revised bylaw to include language in the amending bylaw to support the city's ability to request a third-party audit of a QEP's report. Otherwise, they've gone with option 1. In terms of our consultation process, so in March, we launched a survey to gather feedback from various QEPs and the general public and the development community on the revised bylaw or on the amending bylaw. And in response, we received 7 responses total. This includes 2 from QEPs as well as 5 from developers. This survey was open for a period of 2 months from March to May. And then over the summer, we worked with the same consultant that was retained from the first project phase to support us with making some revisions to the bylaw in response to that public feedback that we received. So just to summarize some of the main concerns that were received during the consultation process, the top 5 were linking site clearing to a building permit, the language in the bylaw being either too vague or too prescriptive in some areas, requiring provincial approval before the development can be approved, as well as concerns that the bylaw would delay housing shortage or housing development and worsen the housing shortage. So just a summary of how we've responded to each of these concerns. So the first concern being tying site clearing to a building permit. Some developers were concerned that the bylaw would only allow site clearing after a building permit is issued and noted that this requirement is not always feasible. For example, they explained that sometimes site clearing is necessary prior to getting to the building permit phase. So in response to this concern, the revised bylaw will continue to allow site clearing regardless of whether or not a building permit has been issued. However, to prevent premature clearing of a site in an environmentally sensitive area, the development permit will now include conditions that will address the timing and the extent of the clearing that's permitted. So for clarity, this would mean that no property located in an environmentally sensitive area would be allowed to be fully cleared right away. Once a permit is issued, only minimal clearing would be permitted as necessary to conduct essential site investigation studies such as doing environmental testing, doing a geotechnical survey, or other types of engineering evaluations. The initial clearing would be restricted to the smallest area necessary for these types of assessments as determined by the qualified professionals in consultation with the project QEP. So the second concern had to do with the language of the bylaw. So some people felt that the bylaw was either too vague in some areas or too prescriptive. In response, we've worked with the consultant to revise the wording in various areas throughout the document to provide more clarity or provide more flexibility where needed. The third concern was requiring provincial approval as prior to approving development. So under current provincial legislation, any proposed development that is within 30 meters of a water course requires provincial approval under the review process set by the province. The only other workaround to this is if a city has predetermined or pre-designated SPIAs. So our response, unfortunately, we're not able to make any changes to respond to this, but we do have included option 3 for committee's consideration if you'd like us to explore the option of predetermined SPIAs. Otherwise, the option 1 in the revised bylaw doesn't include any changes to address this concern. And then the last concern here about the impact on housing development. Some people were worried about the bylaw delaying the construction of new homes, which could make the housing shortage worse. While we understand the concern about housing, it's important to balance this with the need to protect the environment. And riparian areas are crucial for maintaining water quality, biodiversity, and ecosystem health. The revised bylaw aims to safeguard these riparian areas as required by provincial legislation. And so we haven't made any changes to address this concern either, since protecting these areas is both a priority for the city of Colwood and the province as well. So in terms of next steps, the revised bylaw, after we had finished making those revisions, the revised bylaw was sent out for a second round of review by QEPs in October. Staff also held a workshop with interested QEPs to address any remaining concerns. One of the remaining concerns that came up was the removal of the alternative approvals process from the current guidelines. So this process gives property owners and developers more flexibility in terms of allowing projects to have narrower SPIAs or streamside protection and enhancement areas in cases where a significant ecological benefit can be demonstrated by a qualified professional. However, we have learned that this alternative process doesn't fully comply with provincial legislation. So the only other acceptable approach to determining SPIAs is, as I mentioned, the predetermined SPIA approach. There's many benefits to undergo a process to predetermine SPIAs. For one, it could provide more transparency and clear boundaries with respect to where the site development is restricted. It could also reduce application processing timelines and costs for applicants since they wouldn't have to hire a QEP to define the SPIA. The city would already know what the SPIA is for most of the creeks or watercourses in Colwood. It would overall it'd help streamline the process. Knowing where the SPIAs are would also help potentially mitigate, avoid any project changes as a result of not knowing where that SPIA falls. So as mentioned, if committee is interested in this option, is provided as option 3. However, the staff recommendation is to move forward with option 1, which would be to maintain our current approach of a professional reliance model in which the QEPs are retained to assess the SPIA for the site on an individual basis, and then that being sent out to the province for review and acceptance. I think that concludes my update. I am available for questions if you have any at this time.
Great, thank you, Desiree. Appreciate that. Any questions from committee? Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Desiree. This is interesting. So if I'm reading the room right here, I see the value of the predefined, pre-designated SPIA throughout the community and the certainty that that creates for us as a community, you as a planning department, and also for the consumer or the builder. How come it feels like staff is not recommending that? I mean, is it an either or, are you asking us for feedback on whether we should get there? Or I mean, I'm certainly behind the staff recommendation, but I see the value of option 3, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think initially we were recommending option 1 because we hadn't included budget for doing the predetermined SPIAs within the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. However, I understand that there might be budget to potentially explore this in 2025. And Sean can speak to that in a second here, but if you would like to propose option, you could do option 2, which maybe and combine option 1 and 3. So for now, move forward with these updates, and in the long term, recommend that staff explore predetermined SPIAs. That's another option that you might wish to consider. Otherwise, we don't have any strong preference for either or. I think both of them would provide greater environmental protection.
Okay. Sorry, John.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Chair. We have, and Desiree is correct, it's not in the current budget and we haven't planned for it. So we didn't want to be too bold in bringing it forward. We did bring it through under development services, a service review as a consideration. And council will see it as a special initiative under the current budget plan. So council will be able to make that determination. I think right now we have it in at 25 or 30,000 to do the entire city. I can't remember which number we landed on. It might have been 25, and then we thought we better be safe with going with 30. So I think I want to say it's a $30,000 endeavor. If the committee thinks that that's something that they could support, then certainly adding that to your recommendation of support to the staff recommendation would be fine, I think.
I mean, I like that, but help me out a bit. So if we were to explore, a proper SPIA map for the community, that's on our dime, but currently a builder needs to engage a QEP to complete the analysis, and then it goes to the province for sign off, and that's on their dime. And that might be a bit simplistic, but
Yes, so that's our current process. Right now, any development that's within 30 meters of a creek must go through the wrapper process. So that means retaining a QEP to come and do an investigation, have a look at the creek, and determine what an appropriate SPIA would be. Then that report gets sent off to the province for their review, and we can't approve development until they've accepted that report. Under the new process, we would be doing some of that work ourselves, but and just determining a general SPIA. So it wouldn't be like a detailed assessment that the QEPs do on each individual creek, but it would give homeowners a general sense of what the SPIA would be for most major creeks in Colwood.
so if we do the work, does the builder still, I mean, say a residence, single family, do they still have to engage a professional to have a look at that?
They would only need to engage in a professional if they wanted to go if they wanted to propose a SPIA that is less than what the
I see.
city's SPIA is.
Okay, so absent any amendments, they could rely on our GIS mapping for a SPIA area, and you would be able to tell them, no, you can only build to this point. And beyond that is, you know, a no-go zone. Is that simplistic again? But okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just my 2 cents. I think I see the value of perhaps doing this once and doing it right, but I also don't want to slow the process down if there's a way to get there. So I'll yield and hear what the rest of the committee has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Actually, I'll just lead into some questions I had on it. From what I can tell, as Councillor Jansen alluded to, there's savings in terms of cost and time to the developer, and there's savings in terms of time and capacity to the city. And I'm wondering if we can quantify that at all, even before coming to council. So if we're looking at expending, 25K on GIS work, over the long term, what's the savings in terms of, staff person hours dedicated towards this? And John, maybe you can give some insight. I'm looking to see if there's a trade-off here or not.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. That would be difficult to quantify, but I would suggest easily we'd save more than $25,000 as a community, whether it's through the developer or through the homeowner or through the city. We have no way of knowing whether 10 applications in the next 5 years are coming through or 40 applications are coming through in the next 10 years. So it's hard to put a number to it, but anytime we're involved in any kind of SPIA area, we're probably, from the city perspective, spending $2,000 just in time and meetings and back and forth and reviews and so on. And then if we're going to audit something, we're probably spending another $3,000 to $5,000 auditing that QE report that comes in. So I think what it does is it really simplifies the process in a lot of ways, in that for homeowners particularly, they want to put in a deck, they want to change a fence. Right now it's 30 meters, but if the actual area when we've predetermined it is 10 and they want to put a fence in 20 meters away, then they can just go ahead and do it. Don't need to worry about it. So from a homeowner perspective, it's extremely helpful, because otherwise they would have had to spend a few $1,000s engaging a professional to confirm that. So I think from a taxpayer benefit, I think it's huge individually for the ones that are in those areas. From the development perspective, it allows them to go, okay, this is our land and we can work within the land as that designated SPIA suggests. If they want to encroach into that SPIA, then they can then go ahead and hire that QEP professional, do some detailed investigations with regards to that and see if that can be decreased at all. So from their perspective, it may or may not save them money depending on what their build looks like, but it allows them at least to have a predetermined start. And I think it also helps the individual property owner as they go to sell their property when that predetermined SPIA can be there. And then again, depending on that process, we've got some staff time, but I definitely think long term, next 10 years, we'd easily save our money. When we get our money back, could be as little as 3 or 4 years or maybe longer. But I definitely think there's significant value in time and definitely significant value in cost on both sides of the equation.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. And I think if we're creating efficiencies, there is something to be said for that. One of the things we know, obviously, when something escalates to provincial government, with all due respect to anyone who works for the provincial government, it can slow things down. Is there a sense of the time variance as well between the proposed, like the staff recommendation, current process, or slightly amended process, if you will, and predetermined SPIAs? I mean, do we see a significant decrease in the amount of time that, homeowner project or development project goes from, initial application through, or can we quantify that somehow?
That certainly would be significant amount of months. If they've got, again, if you've got a parcel right now that says it's 30 meters, because that's where we start, you got to hire a QEP and then you got to get in front of the province and you have to get them to accept that application. The work for the QEP is probably a month to 2 months, and then getting it in front of the province is another 2 to 4, maybe 6 months, and then getting an answer back and the back and forth. You can easily go 6 months to 12 months. Now, if our predetermined SPIA tells you it's 10 meters and you want to get as close as 15, you've just saved yourself 6 to 8 to 10 months with regards to a timeline. And that's the same for a homeowner, say, wanting to build a deck. If that deck was within that 30 meters, they're now gonna have to spend 2 or 3 grand at least on the QEP, wait 6 to 8 months to get the deck built. And now if again, that deck isn't within the predetermined SPIA, they basically apply for their permit through the city. We take a look at it. We don't involve the province. That's now a week or two process rather than months on end.
Okay, great. And last question for me, and then I'll turn it over to everyone else. In a hypothetical scenario, if we were to move it forward, what's the, it's not optimal because the staff recommendation is what's being asked for. So if hypothetically we were to say, okay, we'd recommend the staff recommendation with an option to explore the predetermined SPIAs, be it this year or the next budget year, what's the course of action there? Is it to make these amendments now and then explore that, or just maintain the status quo until such time as there's a green light to explore it?
I think as Desiree said, we're comfortable with option number one and bringing back the merits of the SPIA under consideration for the 5-year financial plan directly to council. Obviously, the weight of the committee supporting it would help. So you could certainly put it in there as an option to consider and let us move forward with one similar to what the Environment Committee did.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll turn it over to anyone else. Next question. Got Trina here. You should be live there.
Hi there. Mine's a pretty simple question. How long would it take us to do a predetermined SPIA? What would be the time frame if we hired, I'm assuming we would hire a consultant to do that and be done in 4 months, 6 months, a year, whatever?
Thank you for the question. My understanding is that it would depend on the level of data that we have available through our GIS department, so it could vary. It is a combination of a desktop work exercise if there's lots of available data, otherwise some in the field testing to confirm like some details like whether the stream is fish bearing or those types of things would need to take place. So it really depends on how much data we have available. But in the next step, we could include like an estimated time frame for committee and council's consideration as we explore it. At this time, I can't speak to the timelines, but I guess anywhere between 3 months to a year.
I would appreciate that in the investigation. It would be great to just have an understanding of how long that would take.
Thanks, Desiree. It would for sure be months because we have to do the work regardless of our tabletop stuff, and then also has to be submitted to the province. So that province piece will take us some time as well. So depending on our data, depending on how long it takes us to provide the data, goes to the province and it comes back. So I would say it'd be 6 months at least.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. We'll go to James.
Thank you. I apologize if this is like really dialing it back because we have a large proposal in front of us, but I guess I'm trying to understand some of the precipitating motivators that brought us here. Clearly the provincial legislation is thrusting us forward, but I'm trying to understand if there's anything other than just like the intent to comply in this new bylaw change, or if there's anything above and beyond, because I admittedly don't know what the province new the new environmental protection legislation represents.
Thank you for the question. So part of it is the need to comply. So mostly that's removing that alternative approval process from our guidelines. So currently, it's mostly requiring acceptance from the province before any development can get approved. The other changes have to do with providing more clarity and improving the document's usability for the everyday residents. There's a substantial change to the riparian area design or riparian area guidelines specifically that I think just to summarize some of the key changes, we're allowing for like third-party audits, as I mentioned. That was in response to the Environment Committee's recommendation. We are removing some of the exemptions that were found to no longer comply. So permitting like trails or fences within SPIAs, that's no longer compliant with RAPR. We are requiring that acceptance be provided prior to TP issuance. We're requiring adding guidelines to help regulate the timing of site clearing within environmentally sensitive areas so that it can only happen when, like full clearing can only happen when The development site has progressed to construction phase, or a BP has been received. Yes, I can provide more information if you'd
Oh,
like.
that's more than sufficient. And the reason I ask is at face value upon reading, and once again, I want to show appreciation to staff for doing the red line markup of the document and the changes. That really helps like comprehend what's being retracted, what's being slightly modified, and what's being outright added. I am quite torn on this one, admittedly, because there's a lot of great aspects from improving definitions to putting into writing standards, standard practices that anyone acting in good faith would have done anyway. But then I also see certain aspects that are just really overreaching, and maybe those are things that are required now by the province, and we're just in a form of compliance. But it really, from my impression, will have a great impact for anyone who is trying to do anything with their property. I do certainly do endorse the idea of having the pre-designated areas, because that would, as mentioned, simplify things quite a bit. But if there's anything here that isn't required by the province, I would personally suggest that that be evaluated separately. I like a lot of what's in there, and if that is pure compliance, then that's nice. But if there's anything that we did above and beyond the province in the interest of our local ecosystem, then perhaps that can be separated into two proposals versus just the one that we have to push for today. So I don't have much in terms of like a motion here, but just kind of making it known that there's a lot here that is being proposed, and there are aspects of it that I think are overreaching. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Anyone else? Questions, comments? No? Oh, Councillor Jansen?
Sorry, second time around. To Mr. Perry's point, can we be educated a little bit where we are better, faster, stronger than the province, or the areas that we're trying to highlight for our community, and the why that goes with that? In general terms, I don't expect you to go through line by line, but maybe the areas of focus that we chose to go above and beyond provincial standard, please, Desiree.
Yes, certainly. So going above and beyond provincial standards, I think the requirements around site clearing, that's not something that is connected to the wrapper process. That was a city initiative. The requirement for restoration and enhancement of a site, that's not something that's currently required by wrapper. It's encouraged. We aren't requiring it either. We're expecting the QEP to set the restoration objectives, but just even having that language in there about strongly requiring restoration of previously degraded areas, that's something that is not necessarily a requirement in the act itself. It's just something that's been introduced to align with some of the other city objectives outlined in other areas of the OCP, and to provide greater protection to the environment. So certainly if the committee would like us to come back with additional information separating the two out, we could do that as well. Just separating like what's required by provincial legislation versus the changes that are being proposed that are not connected to that. We could certainly come back with an additional report on that.
So I think this, and John, I'll give you a whack at this in a second. All those items that you've heard, we've heard at the council table as important to members of our community. Certainly the site clearing, that is a hot button, and that came literally to council, and it was proposed and adopted by this current council because of developments where the very moment the rezoning happened, they moved in and took down all the lumber, and away it went to the mill, and the community was then left for a decade of a rocky outcropping. So that addresses, and this community has, this current council has been very pleased with that particular bylaw. As far as restoration and enhancement, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think that's, again, that's something that certainly I think I could get behind as a community member. And I guess what I'm not hearing is that we've gone so far extreme that we're gonna in some way inhibit development in our community, or we've taken a completely different tune compared to other communities. John, maybe,
Thank you through the chair. Anything that staff suggested through this document is basically what aligns with either council's philosophy that we've heard through the development process and previous rezonings, issues of concern that we've heard from the public that council's heard and then have tried to reach out and adopt, as well as our current policies such as our climate action plan, our urban forest strategy, all of those things. We're putting those all together, and Desiree, I hit on one of the key ones, which is the timing of the removal. We understand that things are going to have to be removed in certain developments. I mean, where a building envelope ends up, you're just going to lose everything underneath it. But what we're trying to do is not lose it until it has to be lost so that we don't have that decade piece. So it's staff's position that we've basically taken council's current policies, council's previous discussions with regards to developments we've heard, and then embedded in this document. And, you know, quite frankly, it probably does inhibit development to a certain degree. But certainly from a perspective of Colwood and what we're trying to achieve, I think it's well within reason of what we've been trying to achieve through the rezoning negotiated process. Just kind of gives certainty to the developers. So I would say in some ways, it's a tool for them to know, okay, if I'm going to buy this piece of property, these are the expectations, and they're not surprised by expectations. So a lot of times with the development community, they might not like the line, but if they have a line to achieve, then at least they can make their performa based on that. So they really like that certainty. So I would say there's things in there that really help the developer as well as perhaps give them more thought for food for thought before they continue.
Great. Thank you, John. And thank you, Desiree. And, thank you, James. I think you opened an interesting line of questioning there. I think those were very valid questions. Councillor Jensen, I think, spoke to something which I agree with completely. The site clearing issue is something that this council has come across a number of times. You can drive around the community today and see examples of it. I won't name specific plots out of respect for the landowners following the current rules, but it has been a concern, not so much that it's impeding development. I am pro sustainable development like anybody. It's been exactly as Councillor Jansen alluded to, where they simply clear the lot and, maybe financial implications become a factor, or it's simply, hey, I'm selling the lumber and I'm going to flip this property once it's rezoned and carry on. So I think we're operating out of a respect for the community's wishes, or certainly the significant amount of feedback we've heard on that. So I'm going to take the step of proposing a motion. I believe that it's in the best interest of the city that we allow some flexibility to explore the predetermined SPIAs. I think despite the recommendation being number one, I think there's merit in council debating that. I think Mr. Perry, your points may find themselves addressed in further discussion at the council table around that. The ability to potentially find some efficiencies in future that protect what we need to protect, but may also expedite housing in places where it's being unnecessarily delayed. So it's my belief that that's the best approach, is to escalate that to council. There are financial implications, and council can look at that. I know it's a tight year. There's a lot of downloaded costs and other things to consider. We want to try to keep the tax implications to people low, but at the end of the day, 20 to 25K for something like this at some point in the next year or two is reasonable to consider anyway. So I'll move option 3. Nope, please go ahead, Marcy. Is there? Okay, so I'll move option 3 and look to see. I think I've motivated enough. So, Councillor Jansen.
thank you. Just process wise, and it might be just the wording here, Desiree, but it just says direct staff to move towards a predetermined SPIA, and it doesn't speak to making the changes as are proposed. Am I reading that right? Do we need to wordsmith this a little bit, or is that presumed that you're going to make the changes and do this?
Good question.
Thank you for the question. So option 3 would just be for staff to explore the predetermined SPIAs, and then we would come back with.
I gotcha.
Okay.
So, are we at discussion? Has that been moved? Because otherwise, I don't want to get into it.
You want to amend it to do
What would I think? It might be cleaner if we withdraw and start over. What do you
Tell
think?
you, I'll withdraw that motion, Marcy. Let Councillor Jansen
Thank you.
explore where he's going here.
I just was working on this while you were talking a moment ago, and I would like your feedback on that, but I believe a combination of 1 and 3 to the tune of the staff recommendation and that staff explore the option of adopting and designating yada, 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 the predetermined SPIA. Marcy, I'll give you a minute.
And in fairness, Councillor Jansen, that was my assumption. I believe I misheard. I thought we were going with the proposal plus then exploring 3. So I support that for sure.
Okay, so we're saying the same thing, just differently?
Yeah.
Okay.
You clarified, I did not. So good for you. Does that wording satisfy?
Yeah, that's consistent. And is that, are you wanting that last paragraph about the consultation too? Is that in the, I see that there, okay. Does that work for staff? Sorry, before we get too carried away.
Sorry, should we just, sorry, one question, Desiree, would we not want to list it as predetermined SPIAs? We could take out the first streams, but just predetermined SPIAs using the same language as in the original. Marcy, just in front of SPIAs, we just put predetermined. And you could cut out the 4 streams, that's redundant there, and then it would just be consistent throughout.
Yes, I think that works. And then the public consultation would be connected to the bylaw reading, so maybe that could go before.
Yeah, and that would be chronological to bump up ahead of the SPIA. Does that satisfy what you're looking for, Councillor Jansen?
Thank you. I'll move the suggested recommendation as presented on the screen, Mr. Chair.
Any comments, questions from committee? And then I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's unanimous, Marcy. Thank you, Desiree. Appreciate it. Thank you, John, for some timely feedback there. We will move on to item 5.2. Kelsey is going to brief us on the antenna system siting application for Latoria South. Take it away, Kelsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Committee. So yes, agenda item 5.2, the antenna system siting application for Latoria South. So this application is subject to review under both the federal radio communication and broadcasting antenna system policy and the City of Colwood antenna system siting policy. To satisfy the federal policy, an applicant must receive a letter of concurrence or of non-concurrence by the Land Use Authority before moving forward. I also wanted to note that while the federal government takes into consideration the Land Use Authority, they do retain the right to approve a telecommunication tower application if a letter of non-concurrence is issued by the city. So to start with the location of the telecommunication tower, it is proposed at the south edge of Latoria South, bordering the district of Metchosin. The area is zoned CD 28, Area 10, designated as quarry in the Latoria South sub-area plan, and is in the environmental hillside and riparian development permit area. So TELUS has submitted a proposal for a 51-meter or 167-foot monopole telecommunication tower with 9 TELUS antennas, 6 Rogers antennas, and 2 Crest dishes. The proposed tower is colored green to blend in with the existing topography as it borders Latoria Creek Park, which has an existing substantial tree canopy. The location maximizes the distance from residential areas as it is proposed at the edge of the Latoria South neighborhood and fronts Metchosin Road. So I will now begin, or I'll be now be going over various development guidelines in the Colwood antenna system siting policy and outlining whether the application generally satisfies, or does not comply with the policy. So the policy speaks to a preference for co-location with the objective of making the tower less noticeable and reducing the number of locations where multiple towers may be needed. Staff consider this objective met with the inclusion of TELUS, Rogers, and Crest infrastructure included in the planning process. So the policy notes that antenna systems on city-owned property is encouraged, and while this was contemplated in the early planning process, it was ultimately not feasible with the recent OCP and rezoning application for the adjacent city lands process. So this objective has not been met. But for clarification, the tower will be located on land owned by Gablecraft, and it will be leased to TELUS. So in terms of preferred locations for antenna towers, this includes light industrial areas, mixed-use employment centers, undeveloped areas, areas that maximize the distance from residential development, and areas with mature landscape screening. Staff consider this objective as generally met, as the proposed location is currently in an undeveloped area and maximizes the distance from existing residential areas, but staff understand in the future the area will be primarily residential with the potential for a mixed-use development nearby. The policy also outlines discouraged locations such as riparian areas. So the applicant has provided a memo from the project biologist deeming the area outside of that 30-meter riparian assessment area. So this objective has been met. Whoops. To reduce the visual impact, monopoles with flush-mounted antennas are strongly encouraged, which the applicant has proposed. So this objective has been met. There will be a couple equipment cabinets required for all the providers, but they will be concealed with a black chain link fence and will comply with the CD28 front yard setback requirements. So this objective has also been met. As mentioned earlier, the applicant has proposed a green tower to mitigate the visual impact. So staff consider this objective met as well. So under the height considerations, the policy prefers that towers be a maximum of 15 meters, but acknowledges that higher towers may be required to provide adequate service. The city will consider increased height if the proposed tower is located at a distance of 6 times the height of the antenna away from existing residential areas. With that measurement of 306 meters, so that's just over 1,000 feet, there are approximately 8 Colwood properties and 25 properties in Metchosin that are impacted. So staff consider this objective generally met as the increased height will ensure adequate intended service and is substantially compliant with all other development guidelines. So the federal government policy dictates the required public notice requirements. Public engagement letters must be sent to residents within a distance of 3 times the height of the tower. So with a 51-meter tower, that results in a 153-meter notification radius. To ensure maximum public engagement, the radius was considered from the large unsubdivided parcel rather than the small area immediately surrounding the tower. This resulted in approximately 150 letters. The applicant received 13 formal responses within the 30-day timeframe, with 6 in support and 7 opposed. Outside of the required public engagement, staff have received consistent feedback from the community on the lack of cell phone service in Royal Bay. Staff have received feedback at the Ideas Fair, the Let's Talk Colwood webpage, the Prosperity Roundtables, and on social media, particularly after storms and power outages. So city policy requires that a development notification sign be posted on site and that an ad be posted in the local newspaper, which was all completed. So staff have recommended that a letter of concurrence be issued as the applicant meets the Colwood antenna system siting policy. However, committee may wish to recommend that staff provide additional information or a letter of non-concurrence be issued, or another option outlined by yourselves. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. The applicant is also here if you have any specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Kelsey. I understand we have Chad Marlett, the Director of Government Affairs for Cypress Land Services here. Welcome, Chad. We'll just, did you have a presentation or are you just here for questions or?
No, just here for questions, basically.
Okay, great. So I'll
If you
turn it
need a
over to the
summary of
committee
anything.
and see if we have any questions for you or Kelsey and go from there. I see the first from James here.
Hi, my question is actually quite simple. There are other towers that are actually nearer in locality to my residence, and yet my service is quite poor, and I am affected just as was referenced before. So, like, how certain are we that this will actually improve the service when there are several towers in closer proximity to my residence up on the Royal Bay Hill, which should have good like cast down into the depression that is the Royal Bay community.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's not uncommon. And it's basically a problem of, well, I don't exactly know where your home is, but if it's in the shadow of anything, or if you can see the tower, then you should get the service. If you can't see a tower, then there's always shadowing in between a home or an area and where the antennas are shooting out from. But there's also a bigger problem of the capacity of cell sites. So as more people use cell sites, and if you've only got a few cell sites around, more and more people are using the phones these days. And basically the area that it services up just shrinks as more people are in it. And a lot of people are using it for, on smartphones and sending data and all that sort of stuff. And that really shrinks up the amount of area that a tower can service, especially at different times of the day when it's busier and stuff like that. So really, in urban areas, real urban areas, we have cell sites every 300 or 400 meters. Like, I'm from Vancouver and in East Vancouver, but we have cell sites very close proximity to one another. Out here, it's a little different. There's the mountaintop sites, but there really needs to be some lower cell sites here and there to offload the capacity of the network.
Would you say
This
that
tower though, this tower will, it's fairly high tower. It's supposed to service up to the north towards Lagoon Road, but not quite that far because there's a hill there, but to the top of the hill there. And then down towards Albert Albert Head, sorry. So it's about a 4.5 kilometer stretch, sort of north-south or northeast, southwest sort of thing. And then possibly over as far as Veterans Memorial, but probably not that far. And it'll depend upon the undulation of land in there. That's sort of, and then out to the ocean is sort of where it's going to service.
And would you say the infrastructure right now is heavily saturated based on some of your previous commentary?
Yeah, very much so. I think, I've been doing this for about 20 years and Colwood was a place that investment didn't come to for a lot of years. And I think there's been a change of attitude and there should be more investment put in here. So we're always happy to hear, and TELUS is always happy to hear other areas you guys want prioritized for improvement. This project's been a couple of years in the works with the developer down there, and it's taken a while to get to where we are, but it's been good, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. From my perspective, this is a very high priority ticket, and I'm ready to make a motion whenever you are.
Councillor Jansen.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Perry. We've heard loud and clear from residents in Royal Bay and the surrounding areas that this is sorely needed. And I can tell you, the chair and I were talking before the meeting that I've heard directly from the RCMP on this, that their inability to make a telephone call from Lower Royal Bay impacts operations. And clearly it's a telephone call, so it's not the radio system, but that ability to communicate with headquarters offline, off the radio, it is a necessity. And it was brought to my attention based on a particular call for service. I sit on our CREST board. And so I apologize, I may not be completely up to date on the CREST side here, but I know that there was discussion about how high the tower was going to go based on some of the needs for CREST as well. Has that been baked into this proposal?
Yeah, that's a good question, good point. It definitely has. They were going to build a bit lower of a tower, and so Crest wanted something a bit higher, so we've added height for Crest here. And yeah, I don't think it's just 2 microwaves. They're going to have antennas, right, that are going to send out service, and people that like RCMP and other first responders will obviously benefit from this. Yeah.
Thank you. So there was discussion. I know that CREST staff were in discussion with TELUS staff about negotiating about the height, and we needed an extra 10 or 20 meters on top of what TELUS was initially proposing. So there was some back and forth, and I know that that we were on the hook for some additional funds to help offset that cost. So
Yeah, sorry, Al was gonna be here from Crest this evening, but he obviously fully behind it and looking forward to it happening.
So that's great to hear. And for the committee or anyone watching that might not understand, CREST is a Capital Regional Emergency Services Telecommunications, and it has everything to do with first responder communications. The area down now known as the Beachlands has been identified as being problematic based on the geography. So it's a fairly steep hill. So the tower needs to go higher to be able to look down the hill. I mean, and I have an arts degree. So that's about.
No, that's a very good analogy. Even when you're on top of a hill, there's shadowing that can happen too. And shadow can happen down in there. That's probably why they want it to be higher. They'll have better service and tell us.
Yeah, so they've won.
Fortunately,
theirs.
unfortunately.
They've done their study and based on the design as presented, conceptually by the Beachlands, and they feel that they're going to have some issues. So, and this tower is only one sort of additional piece to the puzzle as they start building down there. So thank you. And I think that's about it. Other than that, I've heard loud and clear from our community that they're supportive of better cell service. So the sooner and how we deliver that, I think it behooves us to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Maybe a question for Kelsey. I'm just curious for when it comes before council, just the public survey, how granular is that? I know you said that I think it was what, seven opposed, 6 in favor, something like that in that radius. When I look at that radius, I know a large part of it is future housing. So it's just the rabbits right now, and they probably didn't speak up. There's a couple folks in Upper Royal Bay that were included by the look of it. Some folks in Metchosin who would be, this would be entirely screened by the tree cover. I walk there daily. I know what that looks like. So I'm just curious if we were able to identify exactly where the opposition was coming from.
Yes, thank you for the question. So the vast majority was on Pelican Drive. And there was, I believe, 1 or 2 comments from Metchosin. And I believe the few of the supporters were actually in more of the Upper Royal Bay area. But yes, the 8 homes that were directly affected were the ones that we heard from that were opposed.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I think that's just for future note that the folks who have reasonable cell service on Pelican don't want to drive by a tower, I guess. So the cynic in me will ignore 7 people for the benefit of good 6,000, 7,000 people that rely on the safety and the service and convenience of this tower. So James's behalf, I wish we were approving it formally tonight, but we're just trying to approve it to get to the next level to council. But I just look to see if there's a motion here at all.
Yeah.
I was hopeful Mr. Perry would take his moment in the sun and move this one forward.
That's not up when I make a motion. I'd like to motion that we take the staff recommendation.
Excellent. Any questions? Okay, all those opposed. Trick question there, but nobody's opposed. Okay, so that's unanimous then. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you, Chad, for taking the time out to be here this evening. That brings us to the all-important item 6 on the agenda, which would be adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Got a motion from Trina to adjourn. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.